Next up is a panel discussion. The topic is Media, Me and the Mirror. Have we got as good as we have given? This panel is going to be moderated by Mr. Rahul Bose. And the panelists, one of them, Mr. Yogesh Sadhwani, unfortunately is late. So if he manages to reach before we finish the panel discussion, he'll join us. I'll just quickly introduce the other panel members to you. Ms. Anahita Mukherji, she is currently an assistant editor at the Times of India. She has worked in both the Mumbai and Delhi offices of the newspaper. After pursuing a master's degree in developmental studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, Anahita has written on a wide range of subjects, including education, child rights, environment, right to information, and human rights. She is one of the more respected journalists for ethical investigation, reporting, and follow up on sexuality and sexual violence cases. She is known to have highlighted problems in the POCSO Act and the problems involved in criminalizing consent. Anahita has won the Sanskriti Award for Journalism in 2010. Our next panelist is Ms. Svati Chakravarti. She was just up on stage and I just introduced her to you. The third panelist is Dhanya Rajendran. She's the managing editor of the News Minute, a web platform that focuses on news from the southern states. She has also worked as South India head for the English news channel Times Now, reporting extensively from the states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Andhra Pradesh. Many of her reports on human rights violations and corruption resulted in national investigations, including the two by the country's apex agency, the CBI. She has consistently reported on issues related to child sexual abuse and is very passionate about the subject. I welcome all our panelists and Rahul up on stage.
Is it just me or is it really cold out here? Anyone feeling cold? Okay, how many people want the AC to be lowered or slowered? Super. Suchi, can we just get this done? In this country, you either die of the heat or you freeze. There's just no middle ground. Just like nuance is lost in this country. One day you're a hero and one day you're hanged. So, once I have lamented the absence of nuance, let me... when Suchi, Janvi and I were discussing this topic a couple of weeks ago, I think the thing that really resonated with all of us was that invariably when you have, and I have taken part in many panels on film and media and social activism in media and this in media and that in media, and invariably what happens is that there is a kind of aggressive a lens put on the media. Why don't you? How did you? And then we thought you would, kind of thing. So I said, hang on a second. What is the root issue that we'd like to talk about? And basically the root issue is that not enough is known about what's being discussed in this room. The fact that it's endemic, the fact that the 50% of 400 million becomes an epidemic, the fact that most of it happens at home or with acquaintances. This is stuff that is like a deaf spot in India, in most societies. I remember in Belgium when the massive case of child sexual abuse was unearthed about maybe 15 or 20 years ago. There was absolute shock in that society because it had been shrouded in silence like it is anywhere else in the world. You said, when we get into this topic and we talk today, let's first ask ourselves, have we done enough? So what I would very much like, and my questions will invariably be mirrored, is have we done enough before we can ask you, what have you done? So there's no us and there's a we and you. However, the reason why we framed it like this was that we believe that if it has to be two sides of the coin, then somebody has to make that coin. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So I really think that we should kick this discussion, and I'll just I'll ask questions, but please feel free to jump in whenever you want to, in the most rude manner possible. It makes no difference at all because we're Indian. So, sorry? And I work with them. And you work with them. No, you'll be listened to out here. Everybody will listen to you. And you'll have lots of time to speak. And nobody will interrupt you. So, let me first start, Swati, since we just saw that clearly it was the tip of the iceberg as far as you were concerned. Anybody who is remotely sensitive and listening to you would understand how deeply this whole process has moved you. 1 crore 40 is, but it's a mad number. I mean,
I'm not very good with numbers.
It must have just, it's been a deluge.
It was.
So let me start with you. My first question was going to be to Swati, how did she fathom how large the problem of CSA in our country was? But clearly, we have half the answer. But if you could, now that we're asking, elaborate a little bit more on, that's the deluge of responses, but post that, as you began to meet people, or even while you were preparing for the episode, when did it start to strike you that this was far deeper and far more endemic than you imagined?
Well, Rahul, when we started discussing internally about topics, this topic came up. And initially, so there was heated debate within our team, which was about 4 of us, very small core team, where there were some who said that, why are we, talking about this? Talking about sex on in any form or fashion on mainstream television, that too on a general entertainment channel, at an 11 a.m. in the morning Sunday timing, is not going to be acceptable. And in fact, we needed to make some cuts for censor. We actually had to. When there was talk of penetrative sex or oral sex, we had to remove some of the stuff from the episode. But there were 2 people who said that this doesn't seem to be such a big issue, is it? Because we had criteria to select topics. One is that it should be an issue of national consequence, something that affects all of India, not just a pocket. Secondly, it should be an issue in which any individual, whether empowered, disempowered, anything, should be able to look at themselves and say, you know what, this is an issue on which I can do at least something to make a change. Okay, so does this really fit into this whole national thing? And then, and there were a couple of us in the room who were arguing very much in favor of doing this episode. It was only later, I must confess, that then we said, okay, let's look at statistics, let's dig out. So there was this fantastic Women and Child Development Ministry survey that threw up the statistics as being, something like 50%, so one out of 2, and that kind of did it for us. Later on, when I went a little, as we progressed, and I realized things a little more deeply, I realized that the motivations of the people who were in that core team of ours of 4, 2 who were arguing in favor of doing this episode, were actually survivors themselves. And the reason why they were arguing in favor of it is because they perhaps had more than an inkling of how deep and how dark the situation is.
Dhanya, I'm going to come to you. We were just discussing before this panel. I was chatting with Anahita and Svati, and I was saying that there's a difference between a shroud over an issue and being sensitive to reportage of an issue where you don't take names and you don't sensationalize the incident. How do you strike that balance?
So I can narrate something from my personal experience. I used to work with Times Now for 8 years, and we have covered a lot of child sexual abuse cases. And each time something happens, for example, most of the cases which we would look upon as traveling sex offenders, or cases which includes schools in Chennai or Bangalore, in the cities, right? So a specific case happened where a woman complained to the police about her husband having sexually assaulted or raped her child, and he was a diplomat with the French embassy. So the first thing is to get as many details as possible. We are all on the breaking news mode, and everyone's rushing to get the victim, the perpetrator. For 2-3 days this goes on, and every newspaper is competing with the other to get the exclusive of that story. Every channel is trying to get the exclusive. Finally, that mother told me on the 3rd or 4th day, and I think that was a turning point for me. She told me that, look, all of you got your exclusives. Everyone's got every single detail, whether my child's vagina was torn apart, how she was abused. Google will never let her forget. You guys got all your exclusives. You have moved on in life to your next story. Even our case will maybe finish in the next 10 years or 15 years. But how's my daughter going to forget that? And perhaps that was a changing point for me as a reporter, because then I realized that reportage in India, and I don't think you can blame anyone for it, but it's mostly from the viewpoint of how to get the perpetrator, how to get the accused behind bars, how to make the police file a charge within 90 days. No one thinks on behalf of the victim. And that's where I think sensationalization creeps in, and it's still happening. We are only reporting from the perspective of how to get an accused in, how to get those statistics up. There is absolutely no sensitivity, I think, except maybe, I'm sure she'd agree with me, except maybe a small percentage of reporters or editors who think about how to actually not report too many details.
Anahita, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I would agree with her. And I think I see a growing sensitivity over time. I don't know how many of you here would agree with me, but I do feel that there is a sort of censure with the media putting you don't put all the details. You sort of learn over time that there are things you don't have to put out. You don't sensationalize a rape case. I actually think the media has begun curbing itself better than it did earlier.
Okay, I would totally disagree. I mean, the feeding frenzy, Anna Hazare, and I just tweeted, in fact, about the latest, sorry? Yeah, I mean, exactly. So I tweeted about the fact that now I think the media has become very good, Anahita, about going into this mad feeding frenzy, and then the so-called wiser heads in media start writing about how they should not be covering the story. That this feeding frenzy is really quite bad, and in that becomes a more ideologically elevated feeding frenzy, but it's still a frenzy all the same. However, I had a question to ask directly related to your experiences. I'd like you, if people don't know, to talk about you did a series of investigative stories on the Dongri remand home. It's called, that was the series. And yes, we know it wasn't primarily to unearth some CSA story, but that sort of emerged. Just take us through that, because that's a lovely tale for us to sort of understand how media can get into things and how it should be covered, frankly.
So this actually began with a colleague and I. We'd done a series of stories on kids who were forced into child labor, and these 3 girls were rescued and put in a remand home. And then we started hearing horror stories from the remand home. So we went in with chocolates and biscuits as social workers with a tape recorder below that. We taped what the kids had to say. We published a series. Ours was focused on the poor conditions there, how horrible it was living there. We were not looking at CSA at all. But after our stories, the State Human Rights Commission took up the case. We went on visits with the Human Rights Commission, and on one of those visits, all we had to do was put our arms around the kid. There was no investigation. I mean, you just put your arm around the kid and he'll tell you what he's been through. And the rather crude and maybe childish term that this little boy said was, "Bade ladke gaand maarte hain raat ko." And that's how we wrote about it. We wrote about the instance. We wrote about the boys without their names, what they'd been through.
Sorry, that means that the bigger, for people who don't understand Hindi, the elder boys sodomize us at night.
Sodomizing the younger boys.
Take our ass. I mean, that's the...
Eventually, the response that we got from the remand home, which was shocking, and we ended up reporting that as well. They said one of them was a street kid, and he was a rescued street kid, and these things must have been happening to him on the street, so maybe he kind of imagined that it was here as well. For the other boy, the remand home told us that his mother was a prostitute, so, well, that kind of explains something. And very disturbing responses, and I think we've tried to highlight that as well.
When these stories broke, what was the response from the CSA community of NGOs? Did you get enough support? Did you get? Was there any kind of what should I say, carry-on factor?
No, the Human Rights Commission took it up though. Maybe at that point, not really.
Okay, you've done quite a few of these undercover sort of investigations. How do you find out about such cases? Where do these first sort of spurts of news start coming into your consciousness?
I think the more people who know that you're doing this, somebody will tell you about something, some school principal will tell you that somebody who's in a remand home is facing this. Somebody's, uncles, aunts, someone will just know that you're doing this and, feed the information to you. So once you have a large enough network and enough people know that this is something you could do, you suddenly start getting these, things trickling in.
There's something that when I throw it open, I want people to sort of contribute to this, but I'm going to table it right here just so that you can start thinking. Is that, there's a road safety week that, say, X newspaper will have, Y newspaper will have a youth studies of consumption or their impression of political leaders. These weeks that happen where you can see that it's a very well conceived story around the 360 degrees of an issue, and it's a survey, come vox pop, come blah blah blah. Question is, why don't we have one for CSA? Why don't we have, so yeah, that's what I want you guys to start answering and just chatting about, and then when we throw it open, we'd love to get some ideas as to how we can make this interesting to put out there. Not sensationalistic, but just interesting, because I think there's a great value behind having CSA week. Maybe one newspaper can get behind it. But Dhanya.
But I wouldn't suggest that a newspaper do a CSA week by itself unless there are more stakeholders in it. The reason being that most people don't understand when they talk about CSA. I can give you a few examples. The POCSO Act clearly says that you should not mention a school's name if there is a act of sexual violence, right? There was a rape case in Bangalore some months ago in a school, upmarket school, which had become a huge problem. And I remember everyone were competing to name. And some of the senior editors, because they're colleagues, I would call them up and say, don't name the school. They're like, but no, only if you name the school will people get to know about it. The other simple things like which we don't follow. So I think the CSA week primarily should be for reporters and for editors. And only when they learn how to report on it. No, I'm very serious, because we are going to pass misinformation, which is not relevant, I think, and wrong. So.
Well, okay, so then it obviously segues into a far deeper question, which is, before we actually expect the media to conduct something like this in a responsible fashion, there has to be a certain education done. I mean, this could well be next time something that you do for media. Yes. So again, here's another way to talk about, would there be enough interest from the side of media to say, we'd love to come and send our reporters right here to understand more about the issue? Do you think there's a constituency of people in media open to that?
Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, there's an offer for you. I'm on the managing committee of the press club, and I'd love it if you, organize a session for us and educated more reporters.
Well, I can say yes, but Suchi and John will have to do all the work. Done. Okay, so then this is in between now and our third ASCCSA, this will be done for sure. And I'm sure we can throw it open to all of us also. We can also come and attend and sort of throw tomatoes and eggs and things like that. At ourselves. Why are you laughing? At ourselves. Swati, I had another question for you. This couldn't have been easy. To create the episode couldn't have been easy, partly because you were asking people to come up with stories that would affect people around them. So were there difficulties in actually getting them to speak?
Well, actually, Rahul, any relationship that is based on some amount of trust generally works. And our effort for all of Satyamev Jayate, not just on this episode, was to make an effort never to approach anything as a story, but to always approach every individual as a human being, first and last. And my strict advice to my entire team, because I led the field research, was the camera comes last. And my experience has been that the generosity of spirit and the courage with which people have come forward and generously shared, with only one thing that they always say, कि शायद किसी और का भला हो जाए. Perhaps someone else will benefit. Someone else may not suffer what I have suffered. So honestly, we had very little difficulty in getting people to speak. Then of course some may not want to come on camera, some may not wish to come on television. Those are different issues. But to be willing to share their deepest sorrows, worries, experiences, and to shape our understanding, I think hundreds of people came forward. And I think that we have a dearth of listening in our country. Nobody wants to listen to you. So if somebody genuinely wants to listen, which I think we did, then people just open up their hearts.
What I also meant was that if there were people who were talking about stuff being done currently, that they were experiencing and going through currently, there is a whole bunch of people who don't want those people to speak. Did you encounter cases like that? And if you did, what did you do?
We did encounter cases like that, and these people, so we had some mental health experts and counselors with whom we were engaged and engaging, and we took advice from them on how what we could say to these people, because you see, then this whole thing of interviewer and interviewee just breaks down. There is nothing like that. There is no, and we are just two human beings talking to each other. So you have to reach out with something. Reach out to say that you're not alone. Reach out maybe to suggest that that person could approach someone for help. And then to say that whatever we have spoken is just between us and is sacrosanct and it will never come out, no matter what. So nothing will be done for the sake of the show, ever. So that was a promise we made and we kept.
Dhanya, your trajectories, if I'm not wrong, started from Times Now to what it's yours called newsminute.com, and that's something you've started, right? So the more general question, which I will not ask, is what's the difference, because that's not relevant to this forum. But more precisely, when it comes to now freedom in reportage and a change in how you would report a CSA case, tell me how that you're looking at that has changed from perhaps how you were doing it for any television channel versus now what you're doing for yourself. How have your views either sharpened or just changed?
It's definitely sharpened. I mean, there are quite a few people here who I've worked with at various stages, so they do know that. Like, when you work for a television channel, it's really different. Like, I can tell you times when we have actually chased accused. Like, the guy would be living in his house in Visakhapatnam or in Chennai and he's not arrested. We'll just be standing outside the house for 3 days, 4 days. This is a child sexual abuser we are talking about. And the moment he comes out, we'll put the mic and say, "Did you abuse the child? Did you abuse the child?" That's it, 3, 4 times. And I've really done it many, many times. So, but I guess I've moved on from that. The problem with television is, or even print, I guess to a large extent, she of course specializes in these stories, but there are people in crime reporting who are suddenly put into a child sexual abuse story and they have no clue what they're dealing with. The other day there was a story from the Madras High Court where a judge of the Madras High Court told a victim, "Why don't you marry the rapist?" And I'm not kidding, but a senior editor of a news channel, who's the editor for all the bureaus, actually said, "It's not important, I think they knew each other, the rapist and the accused." That's the whole point. In India, a huge number of victims do know the perpetrator. So I think it's the basic things which people in the larger media setup do not know, not because they don't want to know. They don't have the time to sit and research about child sexual abuse to understand it, because today they're on child sexual abuse, tomorrow they're on rape, day after tomorrow they're on politics, next day a bridge collapses.
So let's say that your sensitivity was appalled or awakened, etc., by your experience with mainstream news media. But how then did you educate yourself? Did you talk to people to say, okay, next time I do stories, whether it's for News Minute or .com, whoever, I shall now reapproach it in the following way? Did you have to rethink, educate yourself as to how to actually handle these stories?
So I'll be extremely frank here. One of the reasons why I changed is, most of you know Vidya Reddy, right? So Vidya would always scream and yell when I called her. And she will yell at me so badly that I will be forced to go back and research. So sometimes don't be nice to journalists. Just because you want that news out, just don't be nice to them. If they don't know the information, you have to make sure that you tell them. I mean, that's how I think many people change, because when they are told that, you know, you are not saying the right thing just because you're a journalist, this information is not correct. And the other thing is that, which I guess she can throw more light on, I think all newspapers should not make crime reporters cover cases of child sexual abuse.
Anahita, feel free to
I think crime reporters, the beat reporters, should not cover sexual abuse cases unless they're sensitized, because that's what is spoiling not only child sexual abuse, even when it comes to crimes against women, that is what is spoiling the reportage in this country. They should have a special editorial to cover only these cases. One person is enough. Like if she heads that particular editorial and she tells a reporter, gives the input. Do you agree with that?
And feel free, and I was unfair to you earlier when I said that I disagree with you. If you do feel that there's a greater sensitivity, please elaborate.
I agree with her to the extent, but I also feel crime reporters in particular need to be trained and sensitized, not just in child sexual abuse, but in the law as well. You cannot be doing this. You cannot be revealing these details. Often, I mean, crime reporters have to depend very heavily on the police. They are your sources. You can't completely turn the tap off and, you won't get any stories. How much to take from them? They'll give you an entire charge sheet, and a newspaper once printed it in all its gory details. That was shameful. So I think there needs to be everyone from the editor to the intern in your office needs to know about how to deal with this. I mean, anybody could maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday, you have your short staff, you send out an intern to cover a story. You need to know what the laws are. So yeah.
Rahul, I'd just like to jump in here. Since we're talking about change, I think that yes, of course, training is very important. Knowing the law is very important. I think for me, a turning point, and when I was researching this episode, and there was another one we had on sexual violence, was we all need to turn the searchlight in, not really think of ourselves in silos, but we are all working at a point in which many things converge: law, media, society, and so on. And each and every one of us needs to turn the searchlight in to see what actually lies deep within. And I want to tell you what I found. With your permission, I'm going to read a little bit out. The old man lifts Anjali in an erotic impulse, takes her upstairs, places her on his lap, and after removing the tiny garment or underwear, goes through the exercise of inserting his genitals into the vagina of the victim. There is bleeding consequent on the violent violation, and the appellant brings the little bell downstairs crying. The circumstances establish beyond doubt that there is no law of limitation on the lascivious propensities of man, and that age cannot wither overpowering moods of voluptuousness. You might think that I'm reading out from some lurid novel, but actually I'm reading out from a Supreme Court judgment. Now, I have more. And this turned a searchlight inward for me. It was not about the court, but it's about what all of us believe, what all of us actually have deep within us. How do we see rape and sexual assault? I mean, we would go with a tagline that says repeat sex offenders. But pardon me, they are not sex offenders. They are sexual abusers. They are violent sexual crime offenders. And I think that unless and until we are willing as society to turn that searchlight in and to say, hey, this is a huge problem. No media alone can solve it. No NGO alone can solve it. No lawmaker alone. No police alone. We have to all get together to protect our children. And let's solve this not competitively, not by doing frenzied feeding and so on, but to actually, like, this room is a great place. We could make a great start right here. And then the other fact, I think, and this again in our reporting and in whatever we do, that sex is not like, it's not about passion. The respondent, longing for his lascivious passion, laid down the girl on a sofa in his drawing room, remained lying on her and closed her mouth so the girl could not scream. A little later, whetting his sexual appetite, he got up, opened the door, allowed the girl to go out. I'm talking about a Supreme Court judgment reporting on a 70-year-old man committing rape on a 5-year-old child. And then finally, this last one. 3 boys between the ages of 10 and 14 with simmering sex urges amid societal inhibitions and infatuating stimulations come by an 11-year-old girl tending cattle in a village. This by happenstance was near a neglected brick kiln which temptingly offered protective privacy for carnal assault. This opportunity excited the 3 youth, lust-ridden who behaved in a carefree manner, trying to make the most out of the situation because the girl was alone and helpless. She cried for help and struggled with the accused to save her honor. Now I can go on and on. There's a whole book that can be written. But the Supreme Court is not out of society, and nor are we. So I feel that this recognition that this is about honor, that this is about sex, that this is about lust, we have to change the language, because we as media work with words and ideas. And if our words and ideas are, pardon the French, fucked up, we need to really start from the root. That's what I'd like to say.
Yeah, I think you made some very, very important points, Swati. Most of all is that this room is a great start, because you know how it is for some reason, and I've never done this in my career as an actor, is that the media is on the other side. I'm like, you know, what does that mean? So I really haven't believed it, and I think that people like Dhanya and Anahita, even if they are not as sensitized and as boundaryless as you, there are the whole of the media, as far as I'm concerned, and that's what I want to talk about later. There should be a complete flow. You know, it's too late. It's too late in the day to start having fences. We have to flow through, and I believe that in every aspect of life. There's just all that needs is a trust and a dissolution of the ego of the self. But we can get to that later. Suchi, will you come on stage and introduce Yogesh? We must accord him the same privilege that everybody else has had, and introduce him. And then Yogesh, I'll fill you in into what we've been chatting about, and then we can take it on with you. Let Suchi finish introducing you.
Yogesh, unfortunately, was stuck in traffic. He's just been able to make it, thankfully, in time. So, Yogesh was working with Mumbai Mirror, and a lot of you in the room are probably aware he exposed the Kavdas case, which was a huge case. And he not only exposed it, he's followed up with the case. He keeps track of everything that's happening, made all the visits to the court. So, actually, Yogesh, if there's anything else you would like to add to tell people a little bit more about yourself, you could please go ahead and do that.
Right, so Yogesh, I'll tell you, I started this discussion, which I'm going to pick up. Suchi, how much time do we have left? 15. So then we should just, I'll get inputs from Yogesh and then throw it open. Let's have a good 10-12 minutes chatting about this. Is that before we start talking about the CSA community media, first you ask the CSA community, have we done enough to make this to put out the information that we say has not been put out? Have we done enough for the media to be educated, as Dhanya said, to understand and to sensitively and correctly, yet impactfully report on not just X and Y and Z case, but on the fact that this is endemic and this is under a massive shroud of secrecy? So I was just laying out those parameters, and then of course everybody was talking about their viewpoints on the issue. So let me first ask, and since you've joined in late, I want to ask you a specific question. I'm sure you must have come with some things that you would like to say. But if you have, go ahead. If you don't, I can ask you a specific question. Which would you prefer? Ask. Great. So in that case, I'm going to ask you to talk us through the case that you did and your learnings about the media and the CSA community, as well as the whether we call them survivors or victims or whatever it is, but you know, just take us through stuff that you might not have shared. People in this room, having read about the case, might still not know.
Correct. I'm really sorry I got late. I'm coming all the way from Pune, so I'll jump straight to the point. So basically, this case was about mentally deficient children, all between 5 and 13, and I was acting on a tip-off that there was a problem at this shelter. This was also, I must admit, my first ever serious child abuse case. So I had little or no experience on how to go about it in a shelter home. When there, spent a lot of time. I was officially a donor, so I was loaded with money and chocolates and everything, because I didn't want the guys to know that I was a journalist. So once I went there, then I figured kids were locked up in a room. There were 18 of them, malnourished severely, a whole lot of issues. I mean, eventually then since they were mentally deficient, but there were some borderline cases, the kids started talking. I could see cigarette butt marks all over their body. They were starving. The ones who were locked up in a room hadn't been given food for almost about a week. And obviously, initially, the shelter home management didn't want me to see that side. But I went with two other friends who were brilliant actors, so they kept everybody busy, and I was able to go around the shelter. Eventually, my problem there, after that, I went on to cover at least 8 or 9 of such shelter homes, some with the authorities, some on my own. And yeah, so now almost shelter homes across Maharashtra I've been to. I've been to Nasik, I've been to Karjat, and more or less the strategy is don't tell the guys that you're a journalist. So just pretend to be someone and figure what's really happening. And in most cases, children are not going to tell you in the first go that I've been abused sexually, physically. So you need to spend enough and more time, understand where they're coming from, pick up their body language, pick up, observe the surroundings, and then figure what's really wrong, and maybe check, and then before you start screaming and saying there is something wrong, there are multiple levels of cross-checking. So I think as a media person, our responsibility, it's not as simple as me simply walking into a center and saying there is a problem, coming out and going, because the biggest problem is that there's literally, when you try and do an expose, there's literally no support from any agency. So I've reported in all the cases, almost all the cases that I've done, whether it was a Nasik shelter, whether it was a Karjat shelter, whether it was this Kavras. First you report to the local agencies, which is the CWC or the Child Welfare Committee. The first reaction of most child welfare committees is everything's fine. We've done a survey, there is no problem. Then you try and obviously reach out to the cops. The cops also try and tell you the same story. Please. So in the end, often there are times when you just want to give up and just don't want to bother, because everybody is trying to tell you that you're lying, or maybe you've not done enough research. But if you're at it, I mean, it does take time. You need to gather enough evidence. And even after a case gets registered and investigators begin.
That's what I was going to ask you. Well, the aftermath. I mean, after the story is broken.
Yeah.
Are you still do you still write about it, or are you just do you find yourself personally still involved in it, or you just move on?
No, I take almost every case of mine to a logical end till such time that the guilty are punished. So it might take 4 years. So I'm constantly at the case during court hearings. I'm there through and through. I've moved to Pune, but I keep coming back to Bombay for some of those cases. You are involved emotionally, as a journalist, in every which way. But
so the blurring of lines is something quite welcome today. I mean, there's this whole idea of I took a photograph of this because I'm just a photographer versus helping. I think we're way past that in this world today to hold those lines firm. No? I mean, it's happened to you naturally. It's happened to you too. You know, I mean, it's happened. Obviously, it's happened to everybody actually on this podium. But should we talk a little bit about this? Let me first ask the first question that I started with. How can we? I'm thinking about a CSA week. You know, and Dhanya very clearly said before you ask a media group to do a CSA week, like a road safety week, like a youth awareness week kind of thing, you have to first get journalists to understand what the issue is, what the issues are around this Central Fulcrum issue, and how to report it. And then Anahita very generously said that I'm the vice president.
Just a managing committee member.
Managing committee member of the press club, and that we can use a forum like this to actually, for all of us to sit and just in a very very friendly way talk to media and say, look, these are the issues, and now let's ideate as to how this can be made media friendly. So therefore, yes. So you know what I'm going to ask, please. Can we get a mic that works, Binesh? Just speak into it. It's very easy to. Let's just pass one of these mics on. Thanks. Will you pass it on to those the dudes? Yeah.
Yeah, this one works. This is.
Oh, feel free to ask questions. By the way, it doesn't have to be just you just feel free to.
Well, we're looking at two sides of the coin over here. One is educating the media, but I think also the NGO sector requires some education on the media, because I mean, I happen to straddle both worlds. One is the world of Rahi, and I also used to be a journalist. There are deadlines to meet. There are bites over here. You know, you cannot help it if a story breaks out and you need to talk to someone. You know, so I think from the NGO sector, you need to understand, yes, people from the print media or the electronic media, they are not educated enough over the issue, will ask you questions using the wrong terminology. Let's have some patience out there. Explain it to them, because I know over the last, about 10 years or something, 18 years, apart from 2 or 3 incidents, we worked very well with the media. I mean, your AKP team was excellent. You know, I mean, you know, when the shooting was taking place at my house, Prerna was, you know, every time she went in to give an interview, she pounced on me and said, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? So there is a lot of sensitivity over here. People call us up, they say, look, we need the story right now. It is a deadline. What can I do? You give them that much of 15, 20 minutes space and they listen. I think it works both ways over here.
The sharper question here is, how can we actually, because we know that it's case to case that's happening in terms of any reporting of CSA, but the idea that this is endemic, that this is all over, that this is agnostic to rich, poor, rural, urban, and the statistics are it's horrifying. And now is the time. We don't want to wait for a Nirbhaya moment in CSA for everybody to start talking and sort of and for reportage to cases that report to be spiked. How can we actually put that out there and say, India, if you want to talk, it's okay, you can talk.
So I have a small input. So like what you said, I've encountered 2 types of people. I'm sure the same. Either it's an NGO or someone, a stakeholder who's shrouded in secrecy, who will not tell me anything about what is happening, and then I just have to sit and imagine and write fiction. And then there are those people who help me. So I think sometimes many of you in the room may think that the media is not a stakeholder, they are someone outside. Why should we speak to the media? There is a lot of sensitivity about the case. The victim does not want to talk, victim's family does not want to speak. But you have to understand that if you are not going to divulge that sensitive information, the information which is necessary, then that reporter is going to get it from someone else.
Absolutely.
And that person turns out to be the
Absolutely.
cop in most cases, who will tell the most absurd of things. So I think that at some level, NGOs also should start talking to the media, especially when there is a case which is happening. At least give them what is needed. Like, I know people who won't even tell us the age of the victim, nothing. There will be no information passed on.
I want to add to that.
And ma'am, after that we'll come to you.
I think there's also been a sort of failure on both our parts, the media and the NGO sector, because I think there's this wealth of information out there in the community working with CSA that I don't think we've adequately tapped into. And I also think at one level, maybe a lot of NGOs, as you were saying, to be educated in the media with deadlines, with what makes news. Often a brilliant report on the topic may not have anything newsy in it or newsworthy. So how to target maybe stories, maybe data, how best to target the media with something that has not been out. And also, I think it's important for all of you to jump in when you see a story being reported, a crime story as we've been
Correct.
talking about, by maybe someone who's not, handled CSA or knows how to do it. Jump in and offer your quotes, offer an angle that you feel has not been looked at. So, yeah, I think there needs to be a bit more engagement.
My name is Parul and I'm from Bhavnagar, Gujarat. Name of our organization is Shaishav. We are running a child helpline and we encounter several such cases where there are lots of CSA cases where the abuses happen through very close family members, including father. Now it is, we've had some case, one thing is that usually one of our experiences that all media attention is always in the larger cities. Like in big cities, but the grassroots experiences are not getting any attention from media. That is one concern. The second thing is that sometimes when the way it is put forward in media, it is so bad that it really kind of threatens us, and the way the identity of the child or the perpetrator is the way it is, and particularly in the community, it gives very bad impact on the child and everything. So it becomes much more difficult for us. While we understand that we need to give you some information, sometimes the way the facts are distorted. Like for example, people interview us on the phone, and when I request that, okay, before you write or finally send it for printing, can you share us a copy of it so that we can ensure that there is no factual error? No, we can never do that. And even after that, the all with the factual errors and everything, the information goes. So all these experiences really kind of
Create a rift between,
yeah,
between
because
the lack of
that,
trust. Sure.
we stay away from media. We don't like to.
Yogesh?
I completely agree with you, and I see that happening quite often with quite a few journalists around. So I know, but can I sincerely request that please try and make them understand, because the more you shy away from them, as Anahita said, those issues will not get reported. And I'm not saying media is the only medium to actually get justice, but it does play an important role. Trust me, and I've seen that quite often where authorities are not willing to register cases. I've seen cases registered. There's just a case in Pune where 21 school-going girls were abused by one of their teachers, senior teachers, reported the case, but the principal never wanted the case to really come out in media. So journalists did a very lazy job, simply went to the local police station, got all the inputs typically, and pathetic inputs at that. The investigation officer completely jumbled up the case, did not give any information. Just a couple of weeks ago, the case was thrown out for want of evidence because the investigating officer did a bad job. Now there, I believe, had media jumped in and kept a track of the case through school management or through the NGO involved, I think the officer would have done a much better job. Maybe a better officer would have been. So you'll have to be slightly patient. We are not perfect. We need to truly understand. I've also seen cases where our journalists are ignorant about the fact that not disclosing the identity of the victim. So I understand. So they say, oh, XYZ का नाम नहीं देंगे. लेकिन अभी उसका अंकल ही तो है, तो अंकल का नाम दे देते हैं. Whereas the rule says अंकल का नाम भी मत दो. So there I completely understand.
Give the name of the area, give the name of the everything. So it's
nothing.
be trial
See, a
and
sensible journalist will basically keep out all this information while giving out some information in a manner, some of it which you may not agree. You might say that completely blank out. I need to build a case. For me to build a case, I'll have to basically do something to indicate 4-year-old, 8-year-old, generic something, some profiling needs to be given, because how else do I connect to my audience? You might say that completely blank out, just say 8-year-old from Bhavnagar. But 8-year-old from Bhavnagar doesn't make sense to my reader. So I'll have to do, but you and I can work on that together. But please be patient, that's the only way.
Right, the bell has gone. It's a very kind bell, by the way. There should be a harsh bell. No wonder nobody's stopping. This is just, it's a very sort of a gentle sort of thing, like a lullaby. But we do have a lady there who'd like to say something. We're getting the mic to you. And once you do say that something, I'm going to ask all you guys if there's anything at all that you just want to say, just go ahead and say.
I'm Vidya Apte. I represent Forum Against Child Sexual Exploitation. And we have been working in Mumbai on this issue for last 19 years. Coming to your idea of CSA week, sounds good, but I think one has to give a lot of thought to it, because she talked about enlightening or awareness of journalists. But if because of this CSA week, there is a lot of awareness created, and there are a lot of disclosures by victims, there should be systems in place to address that, giving help to the victims. Otherwise, it amounts to opening the Pandora's box and not providing enough help. And there are very few professionals and even NGOs working currently on this issue, taking up cases actually.
Guys,
I have a question to ask the audience.
Oh, sure.
This is something which I've been encountering for the last 1.5 years, and I want to know if that's your experience as well. Maybe she would agree. Today when I put out a story, 2 questions are asked to me first. What is the religion of the perpetrator? Is that asked you too many times recently? Okay, I always encounter that. I don't know why. They want to know the religion of the perpetrator. Like the guy called Mustafa was arrested in Bangalore. That is Mustafa. So and the second thing is there a perverse need amongst parents? Do they ask you the name of the school? Tell us where it's happening. Tell us where it's happening. Like people around the area, if they think there's a case happening, do you think regular people want to know more details, not journalists?
Yeah, all the time. That happens all the time.
No, like specific school name.
Yeah,
Ha.
yeah.
Religion is because they want to bring up something about how religion is causing these things.
Yes, I'm encountering that a lot now. Yeah.
I didn't know this.
Because I'm on Twitter and Facebook all the time.
There's one problem that I faced while reporting on such issues. When it's a lower middle class or poor family, you can walk straight into a slum. The kid will talk about the rape, the parents will talk about the rape. When it comes to richer folks, it's so hard to get behind those gates. You barely get past the school. I've had school principals saying, you talk so much about these things that kids start imagining it. They've been told so much that maybe that kid imagined it. Like maybe the 8-year-old imagined that the cleaner in the bus did something. How does one, any suggestions here, any help from you, any way that you all could help with access to richer folks who just clamp shut?
We're going to carry this conversation over lunch with our mouths full of delicious food. Just one idea. Perhaps we need to do our long stories, not newsy stories with magazines like Caravan, who actually carry long-form journalism, and also the vernacular press, which is 90% of. We got to get them into this room, Anahita, when we do this. Thanks. Enjoy your lunch.